Welcome back to Nafe Horsemanship, and today we're going to talk about blankets. Yeah, one of those very, very controversial subjects. I did a video a number of years ago on it. I talked a bit about blankets and why I don't think horses need them, because let's face it, they existed for thousands of years before man ever invented blankets. It's actually only been in the last 100 years or so, or even less, that we decided that horses need blankets. And I explained why I don't think they're good, why they don't work well. And as you'll see, all three of my own, no blankets. I don't even own a blanket. I won't use one. And as you can see, nice and fuzzy. Nice coat there. And every time there's a conversation about blankets, there's always somebody has a comment along the lines of, well, there are exceptions sometimes, the weak, the old, the sick, the young, whatever. There's always exceptions. And just recently I had posted one of my old videos about blanketing, the only one I'd ever done, on my Facebook page, and of course, the usual comments saying that there were exceptions. But there was one person that actually made a really good comment that I'm going to talk about in this video, and they said, the question that we have to ask is, why do we think the horse needs to be blanketed? Now, of course, you can break that down actually into two things. Is first off, do they really need one, or do we just think that they need one? Now, that's something that I find a lot of too, is a lot of people blanket their horse because, oh, the horse must be cold because I'm cold. Well, that horse is a heck of a lot tougher than you are. Actually, they're tougher than I am too. Just the other day it was minus 30. We got a lot of extremes of temperature. Right now it's just slightly below freezing, but yesterday it was minus 30. And it was too cold for me, but it wasn't too cold for them. They don't care. I've actually seen them stand outside at minus 40, not even using their shelter, not eating, just hanging out, just enjoying being outside, because they're horses. They can do that. And anyhow, so... well, as you can see, and one of the comments is, well, certain breeds need blankets, and a lot of people think things like, thoroughbreds need blankets. Well, I've seen people blanketing thoroughbreds, but I have also seen horses. We had a number of them here, and I think there's actually still a couple of thoroughbreds here that are not blanketed. And we have some pretty severe climate here that a lot of you probably can't even relate to. No blankets. In fact, the majority of the herd aren't blanketed. The barn owner raises a high-end, rather expensive, valuable Tennessee walking horses. Not one of those are blanketed. He even had one born in a snowbank and survived just fine. And this is why I want to talk about, why do we think that we need to blanket our horses? Well, there's two parts to that. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes we just think we need to blanket them. We don't really need to. We just think we do. The other part is, if they actually legitimately need a blanket, well, then the question is, why do they actually need that blanket? Are they that weak? Are we breeding horses that need blankets? Something's gone sorely wrong there. And we should really stop breeding those horses if they have to be blanketed just to be kept alive. Oh, well, sometimes the horse is old. Well, if the horse is that old and it is that compromised that it requires a blanket to keep it alive and well, then you should probably do the humane, sensible, and not selfish thing and put the poor horse down, because it's obviously outlived its useful life by that point if it requires a blanket just to keep it alive. Oh, another one is, horses have died, little foals. When they're first born, they died from exposure. Well, you got to ask yourself, why did that happen? Sure, maybe the vet diagnosed that was the cause of death, but why did that little foal fail to maintain a body temperature? I'm sure there was a lot of other factors involved other than just it didn't have a blanket, which is what people seem to think. It's not just a case of, well, it didn't have a blanket, that's why it died. I think there's a lot more to the story. Perhaps there was something wrong with that foal that it would have died, blanket or not. Maybe. We don't know. Or maybe there was a reason that it, couldn't keep its body temperature up. There's all these reasons. And almost all of them are caused by humans. And don't even get me started on the horses that have to be blanketed because they've been clipped. It's even worse yet. And, one of the problems of that is you put a blanket on, it covers the upper part of the body, and they've clipped the front. Well, it doesn't really do much because the cold air comes right up underneath there anyhow. One of the other problems with blankets that, I mentioned before is if you compress the coat down with the weight of a blanket on it, it doesn't insulate near as well, and the man-made fabric that the blanket is made out of is not going to insulate near as well as a horse's natural coat will. And so chances are, they haven't done many studies on it, but chances are that horse is actually going to be colder with a blanket than without the blanket. And these are factors that people don't consider. They just figure, hey, I'm putting a blanket on, the horse is going to be warmer. Not necessarily. I mean, take a look at this one. There's a perfect example here is, look how fuzzy she is. What do you think would happen if that was compressed with a blanket? I mean, look at that. Look how far my hand sinks into her side. That's all insulation that would be lost with a blanket. Do you think that the blanket is going to make up for that? I don't think so. And, one of the other things is, the horse is shivering. It needs a blanket. Well, actually, it's funny because not long ago, this one was shivering. And it had been so long since I'd seen a horse shiver. I actually forgot what it looked like, and I thought there was something wrong with her. I forgot it was, she's just shivering. And it's not such a bad thing. I made mention, actually, in a comment that I had one horse one time. It actually shivered for almost a week. And then all of a sudden, one day, poof, it had a nice, thick, fuzzy winter coat. And it was fine for the rest of the winter. I was actually starting to feel a little bad. And somebody made the comment, well, you're tougher than me. I couldn't have handled watching my horse shiver for a week. Well, it's got nothing to do with being tough. It's just being practical because shivering isn't a bad thing. We see it so seldom that we get real concerned when we see it. But it's a perfectly natural mechanism to generate heat. If the horse is shivering, it's not cold. It's not cold because it's shivering. That's what it does to generate heat in the body. All the muscles are twitching, so the thing's shivering. It's generating heat. So the horse isn't actually cold. It's preventing cold is what it's basically doing. And one more thing about the blankets is you put a blanket on a horse, and I've read a ton of articles on blankets, and a lot of it's opinion. And if you Google horse blankets, oh God forbid you read those articles, because 99.9% of those articles are either written by and published by people that either sell or manufacture horse blankets, and they're all biased. It's very hard to get good information. I found a few that were opinions and theories, and some of them made a lot of sense, like the ones about compressing the coat. That makes perfect sense to me. Another one of the things that I've come up with in several articles, which also makes perfect sense to me, is when you put a blanket on a horse, you get uneven heating, because you're covering, say, from about here down to about here, into the back, the legs, the belly, neck, head, all exposed. So the horse is actually going to be, all of a sudden the body's getting warmed up, so the horse's metabolism tries to compensate for that by not producing as much heat. But unfortunately, in the process, all of a sudden those legs and feet are getting cold. The head, ears are getting cold. So the horse can't even properly control its body temperature with a blanket on, even if it wanted to. The other thing I've seen is, if you are going to use a blanket, another thing I've seen that just bothers me to no end is irresponsible and improper use of blankets. People that put blankets on and leave them on for weeks at a time and never even actually check on the horse to see if it should come off. Personally, I have actually taken horse blankets off because I stuck my hand underneath the blanket and the horse was actually soaking wet with sweat because it got too warm on a nice day because it had that blanket on and it was wet. And because of the synthetic fabrics that most of the blankets are made out of, that doesn't wick away the moisture. The horse can't properly cool. And for those of you that don't understand the horse metabolism, they have far less trouble staying warm than they do staying cool. Overheating is a much bigger risk. You can actually kill a horse with a horse blanket because it overheats, it can't cool properly. And then when it actually does cool down enough outside, it continues to cool off because now you got a soaking wet horse and a soaking wet blanket, and it can't properly dry off and evaporate because it's got a blanket on top that prevents air movement over it, which, that's another thing that, people get concerned about. Horses getting hot and sweaty in the wintertime. I've watched this one on a number of times play to the point where she was sweating when I could watch the steam rise off of her, and she did it to herself. I didn't do it. I wasn't working her or anything at the time. She was just running around having some fun on a cold day, got steaming hot and sweaty. And she never got sick, never a problem. And, again, that go back to breeds. Like I said, the thoroughbred thing, a lot of people think thoroughbreds have to be blanketed because they don't grow good coats. A lot of horses don't grow good coats because you blanket them, particularly in the fall. If you put that blanket on early enough, it actually will prevent the horse from growing a coat. This one here is another one of those breeds that some people are concerned with, the Arab, which is, comes from a fairly hot climate. A lot of people think they aren't capable of staying warm in this climate because it's pretty darn cold. As you can see, this one's nice and fuzzy. And as far as I know, in her life, she's never had a blanket on. Maybe she has when somebody else owned her. I didn't own her entire life. But as long as I've had her, I've never had a blanket on her. And she does just fine. She'll stand outside in the middle of the winter with not even using her shelter or anything, and doesn't have a problem with it. So, but going back to the why thing, that's the biggest question we have to ask when we think we need to put a blanket on horses. Why? Why do we think we need to put that blanket on? Does the horse really need it in the first place? And why do we think so? And if it does actually need it, man, why does it? Is it because we're breeding weak horses? Is it got something to do with the way we're feeding them, the way we're keeping them? Is that horse that old or that sick that it requires a blanket just to keep it alive? In which case, are you really doing it a favor by keeping it alive? Think about it. Why are you blanketing your horse? Hey, have a good day.